Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant, and I want to talk about the Close Quarters update for Elite Dangerous.
Find your fame. Test your mettle. Hone your skills. Become a champion.
So, when CQC was announced and the timed Xbox exclusivity, there was a lot of different opinions floating around about it, and, to be honest, quite a bit of controversy as well. A lot of people were upset for a lot of different reasons, and as usual with the way these things go, I think mostly a lot of that was misunderstood and misinterpreted. So let's have a look at what really is going on with CQC, and is it really a problem, or does it add something to Elite as a whole? Does it bring value to the game? Now first, I think it's important to take a look at one of the main arguments here, and that's the issue of timed exclusivity. A lot of people think it's not a problem, a lot of people think it is a problem. But really, that is perhaps a separate issue to close quarter combat itself and the change in direction it could potentially represent for Elite Dangerous as a game. But let's take a look at that anyway. Why are people upset that there's a timed exclusivity for the Xbox? I don't think it's just a case of PC owners throwing their toys out the pram and not being happy about what they've been promised, or they believe they've been promised. I think there's a little bit more to it than that, and to be honest, I think some people are, they're justified in feeling the way they feel. They've got a point. It's not something that bothers me personally, but I can really understand where these people are coming from. A lot of the PC users here, the ones we're seeing making these statements, are backers of the game. They back the game on Kickstarter, and in some cases they back the game to a lot of money. Now, of course, it's not just about the money, and in fact it's not really just about it being only a game, in quotes. For a lot of people, Elite is more than a game. It's something they grew up with, it's something that they have fond memories of, and it's a franchise that was very dear to their heart. So they've got a lot of emotional attachment to the game. It means far more to them than just playing a quick round of Call of Duty. It means a lot more to them than just jumping in to the latest and greatest game release. And in fact, that's why a lot of people back games on Kickstarter, isn't it? To get the game of their dreams made. Elite has the potential to be more than just a game. It has the potential to be a hobby for people. People play World of Warcraft for decade at the time, not just because it's a game, but because it's a hobby. So I think that's quite an important distinction to make. Gaming as a whole is a hobby, of course it is, but there's a subset of games within the gaming industry that are their own things. Racing simulators, for example. Some people play nothing but racing simulators, and that is a hobby, isn't it? So I think there's an emotional investment and a time investment that people have with Elite Dangerous. It's more than just a game to them, and in many cases it's more than just the money they put into their game. So that forms a part of the reason of why a lot of people actually went and backed the game on Kickstarter and backed it during its development. And during that development phase, Frontier made some very, very detailed descriptions about what Elite was going to be and what it wasn't going to be. And during that entire phase, nothing even remotely resembling CQC was ever discussed. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't get an arena combat module, and it doesn't mean there isn't any desire for one. But it does explain perhaps why some people who back the game and listen to all the development talks might look at CQC and wonder, well, where the heck did this come from? What is this about? Frontier never mentioned anything like this at any point at all in the past, whereas they did mention a whole lot of other content. Now, as I've said before, I absolutely love Elite. I adore the game, and I've played it a long time. I've put a lot of money into it. I've put a lot of time into it. I've put a lot of emotional investment into the game, and it means a great deal to me. But I think I'd be hard pressed to argue that Elite is still really, it's a fairly bare bones game, and there's a lot of features missing from it that were initially talked about during the development phase, and indeed most likely they are probably coming up in the future, and you can see some of them in the video I made recently, the top 10 updates to Elite, and in fact I probably could have added a bunch more things to that, stretching the list to a top 20 maybe, but that's by the by. The point is, we all know that Elite is still in development. There's still a lot coming. It still has hopefully a bright future to it where it's going to be a much richer game. But I can understand people who backed the game a long time ago, who've watched its development for 2.5 years, and people who bought the game at release and paid AAA prices for it. £40 price tag is a lot to ask for a game that is essentially bare bones and still in development. That's not to say we haven't been given a lot of content over the past 6 months. We've had 3 huge patches, but keep in mind that patch 1.2, the one titled Wings, added grouping to a game that was sold as a multiplayer game. And patch 1.3 Power Play does add a lot of content to the game, which does dramatically change the dynamics of the galaxy. It makes the galaxy a lot richer, it gives a face to the game, and it gives a lot of direction for players that actually wanted that. But keep in mind, regardless of that fact, Power Play still uses existing game mechanics. It doesn't actually introduce any new game mechanics at all. We still use the same trading mechanics, we still use the same combat mechanics. So I think it can be argued that patch 1.3 didn't really bring any changes as to how we play the game in terms of the game mechanics, but it did bring some changes as to why certain players may engage in the gameplay mechanics. As mentioned, it brings direction with it. So that brings us up to date in terms of content that's been delivered to us since the game's release. But of course, we've still got backers who've watched this game's development for the past 2.5 years, wondering where some of the depth is going to come from, some of the gameplay mechanics that they were promised. So things like salvaging and NPC wings, things like the dynamic selling of exploration data, or discovering strange artifacts. We found one of them, but they're certainly not a major thing within the game. And the content updates we've had so far don't bring us any closer to that. So looking forward to the future, the next update we've been shown is a deathmatch arena. Yep, deathmatch, team deathmatch, and a variation on capture the flag. Now, when that was first announced, my opinion of the matter was fairly, what the heck is going on here? This isn't what was promised. This is nothing to do with Elite. How does this fit in with the galaxy that was promised by Frontier? But as more details were revealed, we were shown that CQC is a separate mode to the game. It's accessed from the in-game menu, and therefore it's completely separate from the main Elite galaxy. And the deathmatch arena has its own ship mechanics, it has its own tweaks to the flight mechanics, and weapons function in a different way. So essentially it's an additional game, isn't it? There's a potential downside there for some players though, in that those seeking the constant PvP may well leave the main galaxy and head toward the combat arena instead, meaning that even though PvP in the galaxy is currently quite a rare occurrence, it's likely to become an even rarer occurrence once the arena module is released. And we need to remember that things like CQC have their own little team working on them, so it's not really taken away from the development of the main game. And we do know that future expansions are promised. Walking around and planetary landings have been reconfirmed again by David Braben at E3, so we know all that stuff is coming, and we know development on Elite is still going to progress. And we know Frontier also need funds. I don't think it's a case that they're financially strapped, but Michael Brooks, the executive producer, has recently said on a blog post that Frontier's main source of income for Elite Dangerous actually comes from sales of the game. So they need to sell as many copies as possible, and I'm pretty sure that everyone who's going to buy the initial release of the PC version of Elite has already gone out and bought it, although a bunch of new people probably bought it on the recent Steam sale. But as they move forward, they're going to need to keep selling copies of the game. So releasing it on new formats makes sense if that's going to be their main source of income. And selling a game like Elite on consoles is probably a hard sell. It might be a bit of a cliche or a stereotype to say that console players really look for quick action, but when you really have a look at Elite, the difficulty curve on it is pretty large, and it's got a very slow introduction curve. And if you want quick action, that's not something you're going to get from Elite. So the Arena module really does bring that in, and that makes sense when you're looking at a console release. You're going to need something to keep people interested, and hopefully CQC will do that, although I don't know over what length of time that's going to do for people. Is CQC merely intended as an introduction to the main Elite game, or if it's a game in its own right, what does it have that will keep people's interest long term? We'll have to wait and see on that one, won't we? So overall, as with a lot of things released from Frontier recently, Close Quarter Combat really is a bit of a mixed bag, isn't it? On the one hand, it brings some new content to the game, whilst that simultaneously was never something that was ever discussed from Frontier. And whilst it can be argued that this will broaden the appeal for the game, in terms of gameplay itself, I really have to wonder if that is necessary. Of course, it would seem that it is necessary for Frontier's financial bottom line. So I think CQC is going to bring something positive for a lot of people. The rapid pace instant action is by no means a bad thing, even though it's very different to the main game, and it will certainly help to broaden the audience. But will I play it myself? Well, time will tell. We'll have to see what it's like when it actually comes out, but I am not a fan of arena combat. I generally don't play multiplayer combat games of any form, and I've never really liked them, to be honest. Which is why the initial proposal for Elite appealed to me so much. It was something drastically different to all of that. So I suspect that I will join the ranks of players that are currently not playing Power Play and may well be unlikely to play CQC, which leaves me essentially playing the same game that I was playing when Elite was released back in December. Albeit with its many enhancements and quality of life improvements we've had over those previous months. The real issue for me, the real concern, is that Elite was always a niche game. It was a niche game aimed at a niche audience. And, you know, that makes sense. The game only has a certain appeal to it, doesn't it? But when the company behind the game needs to continuously sell the game in order to fund their bottom line, the only direction they really have to go in is to broaden the appeal of the game and make it appeal to a more mainstream market. So for me, the real question behind close quarter combats and the arena combat, as well as to an extent Power Play itself, is if Frontier are going to broaden the appeal of Elite, can they simultaneously deliver the full game they promised to their original audience? As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.